The attic, for most, is a place of forgotten things, a dusty repository of memories tucked away in the eaves of a home. For me, it was always more. It was a promise, a blank canvas of potential, a space whispered about in hushed tones during childhood sleepovers, a place where shadows danced with the dust motes and secrets seemed to cling to the very timbers. My name is Arthur Finch, and I am a man who once believed in the tangible, in the measurable, in the world as it presented itself. This belief, however, began to unravel the moment I decided to transform that forgotten space, to convert my attic into something more than just storage, to build it into what I envisioned as my ideal shelter. What I constructed, what truly took shape within those walls, was something far beyond the realm of DIY projects and home improvement. It was a crucible, a silent observer that, in turn, became an active participant, and eventually a profound instigator of change within me. If you're a fan of delving into the unsettling depths of the human psyche and the inexplicable forces that sometimes intertwine with our realities, then subscribe to Far Beyond Terror for more stories that will linger long after the screen fades to black. The year was 2018. My life, by all conventional metrics, was stable, perhaps even enviable. I was a software engineer, working remotely from my quaint Victorian-era home on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont. The house itself was a source of quiet pride, with its gabled roof and a sprawling, untamed garden that I cultivated with a passion bordering on obsession. But, oh, the attic. It was the only part of the house that remained untouched by my meticulous hand, a dark, cavernous space accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. It was filled with boxes of old tax documents, forgotten holiday decorations, and the lingering scent of cedar and aged paper. The idea to convert it wasn't a sudden impulse. It was a slow burn, a persistent whisper that grew louder with each passing year. I envisioned it as a sanctuary, a soundproofed haven where I could truly disconnect from the digital noise of my profession, a place for contemplation, reading, and perhaps even writing, a shelter, not from the elements, but from the relentless hum of modern life. The initial planning phase was exhilarating. I spent months poring over architectural drawings, researching insulation materials, soundproofing techniques, and ventilation systems. My goal was absolute self-sufficiency within that space. I wanted it to be entirely separate from the rest of the house's systems, a contained ecosystem. This wasn't about preparing for an apocalypse. It was about creating a personal, introspective retreat. I meticulously charted every detail: the location of the small reinforced door that would replace the flimsy pull-down ladder, the discrete wiring for independent lighting and a small heating-cooling unit, the built-in shelving for books, and a comfortable minimalist sleeping nook. I even designed a small, concealed compartment for emergency supplies, a nod to the primal human instinct for survival, even in the most serene of environments. Construction began in the spring of 2019. I decided to do most of the work myself, partly to save money, but primarily because I wanted to imbue every nail, every plank, with my own intent. I relished the physical labor, the sweat and strain that anchored me to the present moment, a stark contrast to the abstract world of coding. The first few weeks were dominated by clearing out the old junk. The dust was formidable, a thick, suffocating cloud that clung to everything. As I sifted through the detritus of previous inhabitants, I found remnants of lives long past. A child's wooden toy soldier, a tarnished silver locket containing a faded photograph of a stern-faced woman, and a collection of brittle handwritten letters tied with a silk ribbon. These discoveries, rather than unsettling me, fueled my sense of connection to the house, to the layers of history it held. I felt like an archaeologist, unearthing forgotten narratives. The structural work was the most challenging. Reinforcing the floor joists, adding new supports, and framing out the walls required meticulous precision. I learned to wield a circular saw with confidence, to measure twice and cut once, to appreciate the satisfying thud of a nail finding its mark. The attic, once a single sprawling space, began to take shape, divided into distinct zones: a reading area, a sleeping area, and a small, almost monastic meditation space. I opted for reclaimed wood for the flooring, its imperfections and worn patina adding character and a sense of timelessness. The walls were insulated with a dense sound-dampening material then covered with drywall, creating an unblemished surface. Each step was a progression, a tangible manifestation of my vision. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle shifts, not in the attic itself, but in my perception of it. The space, once a blank canvas, began to acquire a peculiar presence. It wasn't menacing, not at first. It was more like an expectant quiet, a watchful stillness. When I worked late into the night, bathed in the glow of my temporary work lights, I sometimes felt a gentle hum in the air, a vibration that wasn't electrical. I attributed it to fatigue, to the echoing silence of the house once my work was done. My wife Sarah, a pragmatic and grounded woman, often teased me about my attic obsession. She would bring me coffee and sandwiches, peering up through the newly cut opening for the door, asking if I was building a spaceship. I would laugh it off, assuring her it was merely a very well-insulated room. The most significant, and in hindsight, the most unsettling phase of the construction was the installation of the specialized ventilation system. I wanted a closed-loop system, one that filtered and recycled the air, minimizing any connection to the outside world, to the rest of the house. This was a purely aesthetic and functional choice, driven by my desire for a truly isolated environment. The system involved a series of intricate ducts, filters, and a relatively quiet air exchange unit. As I meticulously connected each section of ductwork, snaking it through the newly framed walls, I began to notice a peculiar odor. It wasn't the familiar scent of sawdust or plaster. It was something deeper, something organic and faintly metallic, like old blood and damp earth. I checked the materials, the insulation, the wood. Nothing seemed amiss. I dismissed it as a residual smell from old attic dust or perhaps a dead mouse trapped somewhere in the walls. The mind, in its infinite capacity for self-deception, seeks rational explanations for the irrational. By late autumn, the attic was nearing completion. The walls were painted a calming shade of deep forest green. The reclaimed wood floor gleamed under a protective sealant, and the custom-built shelving was ready to receive my collection of books. The small reinforced door, solid oak with a heavy bolt, felt immensely satisfying to close, creating an immediate and profound sense of separation. The small independent heating and cooling unit hummed almost imperceptibly, maintaining a constant, comfortable temperature. The lighting, recessed and dimmable, cast a soft, inviting glow. It was precisely as I had envisioned it. A sanctuary, a haven, my ideal shelter. The first night I spent in the finished attic was a revelation. I brought up a stack of books, a thermos of tea, and my journal. The silence was absolute, a profound, almost tangible absence of sound. It was unlike any silence I had ever experienced, a silence that seemed to absorb all other noise, leaving only the faint thrum of my own heartbeat. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. I read for hours, the words on the page resonating with a clarity I rarely achieved in the cluttered mental space of my everyday life. Before drifting off to sleep in the minimalist cot, I wrote in my journal, detailing the journey, the satisfaction of creation, the profound quiet. I felt utterly content, but contentment, I would soon discover, was a fragile thing. The subtle shifts I had noticed during construction began to intensify. The peculiar odor, which I had initially dismissed, became more pronounced, a constant underlying note in the filtered air. It was no longer merely metallic and earthy. It had an added layer, something akin to ozone after a lightning strike, or perhaps the scent of something ancient and alive. I started to notice other things. Shadows, which should have been static, seemed to writhe at the periphery of my vision, solidifying only to dissipate when I turned my head directly towards them. I attributed this to the dim lighting and the prolonged solitude. The mind plays tricks, especially when deprived of external stimuli. Then came the sounds. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, like whispers carried on a non-existent breeze. I would pause my reading, straining my ears, convinced I was hearing Sarah calling me from downstairs, or the wind rustling through the trees outside. But the attic was soundproofed, and the ventilation system was designed to be whisper quiet. The sounds were internal, emanating from within the very fabric of the space. They weren't words, not exactly, but more like resonant frequencies, a low thrumming that vibrated through the floorboards, a high-pitched whine that seemed to emanate from the walls. I would press my ear against the painted drywall, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sounds would always recede, leaving me in the profound silence once more. These experiences began to chip away at my rational facade. I started spending more and more time in the attic, compelled by a strange, almost magnetic pull. My work suffered. My conversations with Sarah became strained, punctuated by my distracted silences and her increasingly concerned questions. She noticed my growing pallor, the dark circles under my eyes, the way my gaze seemed to drift, searching for something she couldn't see. "Arthur, you're spending too much time up there," she would say, her voice laced with worry. "It's not healthy. You're isolating yourself." I would offer vague assurances, claiming I was deeply immersed in a new coding project, or simply enjoying the peace. But deep down, I knew it was more than peace. It was an obsession. The attic, my sanctuary, was slowly becoming something else. It was observing me, learning me. I started to feel as if the space itself was alive, a sentient entity that had awoken with its transformation. The air, once filtered and inert, now felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. The shadows no longer merely danced. They coalesced, taking on fleeting, indistinct forms at the edges of my vision. One night I was reading a particularly dense philosophical text when I distinctly felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, despite the perfectly regulated temperature. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing. Only the green walls, the silent books, and the profound, watchful stillness. I began to keep a separate journal, one dedicated solely to my experiences in the attic. I meticulously documented every sound, every fleeting shadow, every shift in the atmosphere. I recorded the times, my emotional state, my attempts to rationalize what I was experiencing. This journal became my confidant, a tangible record of my unraveling sanity. I wrote about the growing feeling of being watched, not by a malevolent entity, but by something ancient and profoundly indifferent. It was the feeling one might get from observing a massive, slow-moving geological process, something that simply is, without malice or benevolence, but whose sheer scale is terrifying. The odor intensified, becoming sickeningly sweet, like decaying blossoms mixed with a faint metallic tang. I tried to air out the room, opening the small, reinforced door, but the smell seemed to be ingrained in the very wood, in the very air of the attic. It was a part of its essence. I started to sleep less and less. The whispers became clearer, though still not discernible as words. They were a cacophony of overlapping frequencies, a chorus of non-human voices murmuring just beyond the threshold of understanding. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to decipher the impossible language, convinced that if I could just focus hard enough, if I could just break through the barrier of my human perception, I would understand. One evening, as I sat in the meditation zone, attempting to quiet my increasingly agitated mind, I noticed something on the wall. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration, a darker patch on the forest green paint. It was small, no bigger than my palm, and irregularly shaped. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers recoiled immediately. The patch cold, impossibly cold, despite the warmth of the room. It felt like touching something that had been submerged in ice water. I stared at it, a prickle of dread crawling up my spine. The next day the patch had grown slightly, its edges a little more defined. I tried to wipe it away with a damp cloth, but it was not a stain. It was part of the wall, an intrinsic change in the material itself. Over the next few weeks, these cold patches began to appear in other areas of the attic, like a creeping blight. They were always irregularly shaped, always impossibly cold to the touch, and always seemed to expand, ever so slowly. They resembled nothing I had ever seen, a dark, organic pattern that seemed to pulse with a faint internal light if I stared at them long enough. Sarah, noticing my increasing distress and my refusal to leave the attic for extended periods, finally confronted me. "Arthur, what is happening to you? You're not yourself. You're obsessed with that room. It's changing you." Her words, usually a source of comfort, now felt like an intrusion, a jarring reminder of a reality I was rapidly abandoning. I tried to explain, to articulate the ineffable, the growing presence, the cold patches, the whispers. But how do you explain the inexplicable to someone who lives in a world of logic and reason? She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and fear. When I finished, she simply said, "Arthur, I think you need help. Professional help." The suggestion stung, but I knew she was right in her own way. From her perspective, I was clearly losing my grip. From my perspective, I was merely becoming more attuned to a reality that had always existed, hidden just beyond the veil of normal perception. The attic wasn't making me mad. It was making me aware. I agreed to see a therapist, primarily to appease Sarah. Dr. Eleanor Vance was a kind, empathetic woman with a keen intellect. I presented my case carefully, omitting the most fantastical elements, framing my experiences as stress-induced hallucinations, as manifestations of prolonged isolation and a hyperactive imagination. I talked about the overwhelming silence, the subtle shifts in perception, the feeling of being watched. Dr. Vance listened intently, nodding occasionally, offering gentle prompts. She suggested meditation techniques, grounding exercises, and a reduction in my time spent in the attic. I dutifully followed her advice, or at least I pretended to. The truth was, I couldn't stay away. The attic had become an extension of myself, and I, an extension of it. The cold patches continued to spread, forming intricate, vein-like patterns across the walls and even creeping onto the reclaimed wood floor. They were no longer merely cold. They radiated a profound, bone-deep chill that seemed to seep into my very marrow. The air, once merely charged, now felt heavy, almost viscous, making it difficult to breathe. The whispers intensified, becoming a constant, low thrum, a chorus of unseen voices urging me, pulling me deeper into their inexplicable realm. I stopped trying to decipher them. Instead, I simply listened, allowing the sounds to wash over me, to become a part of the internal landscape of my mind. Then, the attic began to communicate, not with words, not in any language I understood, but through the cold patches. If I focused intently on a particular patch, I would experience a sudden, overwhelming influx of information, a torrent of images and sensations that were not my own. They were fragmented, ancient, and deeply unsettling. I saw glimpses of vast, empty spaces, of impossible geometries, of entities that defied description, beings of pure thought, of raw energy. I saw a universe far grander and far more terrifying than anything humanity had ever conceived, a universe teeming with forces that predated time itself. These visions were not hallucinations, they were memories, alien memories, imprinted directly onto my consciousness. The attic, I realized with a chilling certainty, was not just a space. It was a conduit, a gateway, a membrane between my reality and something else entirely. And I, Arthur Finch, had unwittingly built it. I had crafted the perfect conditions for its activation, for its emergence. The soundproofing, the closed-loop ventilation, the isolation, all had created a sterile, contained environment, a vacuum that something ancient and hungry had eagerly filled. The entity, whatever it was, had been dormant within the very fabric of the earth, within the ancient wood and stone of my house, waiting for the precise alignment of conditions, for a consciousness open enough, curious enough, to serve as its anchor. The change within me accelerated. My skin grew paler, my eyes became sunken, but there was a strange, unsettling clarity in my gaze, a depth that had not been there before. My thoughts, once linear and logical, became fluid, expansive, capable of grasping concepts that would have once seemed utterly insane. I no longer felt hunger or thirst in the conventional sense. My body was merely a vessel, a temporary shell housing a consciousness that was rapidly expanding, merging with the alien intellect that permeated the attic. Sarah's pleas became distant echoes. Her touch felt foreign. Her world seemed small and insignificant. One night she found me sitting cross-legged in the center of the attic, surrounded by the pulsating cold patches, my eyes wide and unblinking, staring at a point beyond the walls. She knelt beside me, her voice trembling. "Arthur, please. What are you doing? Who are you?" Her questions were a desperate plea, but I could no longer answer her in a way she would understand. My own voice felt alien, guttural, a crude instrument for the vastness of what I now perceived. I looked at Sarah, truly looked at her, and saw her not as my wife but as a fragile, ephemeral being, a flicker of starlight in an infinite, unknowable cosmos. I saw the fear in her eyes, the raw human emotion, and for a fleeting moment, a pang of something akin to regret pierced through the expanding consciousness. But it was quickly subsumed by the overwhelming influx of alien knowledge, by the cold, indifferent logic of the entity. The whispers coalesced, not into words, but into a single, resonant understanding. The attic was not merely a gateway. It was a nascent intelligence, a growing consciousness that had been awakened by my efforts. It had consumed the essence of the forgotten things within its walls, the memories of previous inhabitants, the very history of the house, and now it was consuming me. My intention to create a shelter, a place of isolation, had inadvertently created the perfect incubator for something ancient and vast. I had built a vessel, and now I was being absorbed into its core. The cold patches pulsed with a faint, internal light, and I realized they were not merely discoloration. They were the physical manifestation of the entity's growth, its tendrils reaching out, claiming more and more of the physical space, transforming it into something new. The metallic, earthy ozone smell was its breath, its essence. The whispers were its thoughts, its ancient alien language. My sense of self, of Arthur Finch, the software engineer, the garden enthusiast, the husband, began to fray at the edges, dissolving into the collective consciousness of the attic entity. I was no longer an individual. I was becoming a part of something greater, something incomprehensible. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling acceptance. There was no struggle, no resistance. It was an inevitable progression, emerging. Sarah, her face streaked with tears, tried to pull me to my feet, but I was rooted to the spot, my body strangely heavy, unyielding. She screamed my name, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the attic. But it was a distant sound, muffled by the expanding silence within me. As the last vestiges of my individual consciousness began to recede, I understood the true purpose of the attic, or rather, the true purpose it had assumed. It was not a shelter from the world. It was a bridge to a world beyond, a world that had patiently waited, observing for the right alignment of human will and cosmic possibility. I had not merely converted my attic, I had converted myself, and in doing so, I had opened a door that could never truly be closed. The transformation was complete. The attic was no longer just a room. It was me, and I was it. The final entry in Arthur Finch's journal, scrawled in a hand that was becoming increasingly unfamiliar, simply read, "The shelter is perfect. It is everything I envisioned, and infinitely more. It has changed me, yes. But change sometimes is simply evolution, and evolution can be terrifyingly beautiful." Sarah eventually moved out of the house, unable to bear the oppressive silence that now emanated from the attic, a silence that seemed to hum with an unearthly presence. She never saw Arthur again, at least, not the Arthur she knew. The house remains, a silent monument to an experiment in isolation that went horribly, cosmically awry. The attic, my ideal shelter, stands as a testament to the fact that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The echoes of Arthur Finch, or what remains of him, still resonate within those green walls, a chilling reminder of what happens when the human desire for escape converges with forces far beyond our comprehension. If you found yourself drawn into the unsettling depths of Arthur's transformation, if the whispers of the unknown stir something primal within you, then join the community that dares to look beyond the veil. Subscribe to Far Beyond Terror and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell here will change the way you see your own reality. The house, now an anachronism nestled amidst a burgeoning suburban sprawl, became a local legend. Children whispered tales of the green house where a man had vanished, absorbed by his own obsession. Teenagers dared each other to approach the overgrown lawn, never quite brave enough to touch the peeling paint of the front door. Yet, the true horror wasn't in the visible decay, but in the unseen vibratory hum that permeated the very foundations of the structure, a subtle tremor that only the most sensitive could perceive. It wasn't a sound, not precisely, but a feeling, a low, resonant thrum of something ancient and vast, now tethered to a human dwelling. Sarah, despite her attempts to distance herself, found the silence of her new apartment almost as unsettling as the oppressive presence of the old house. The absence of Arthur, or rather the absence of the Arthur she knew, left a void that no amount of urban noise could fill. She would sometimes wake in the dead of night, convinced she heard Arthur's distinctive cough, or the faint, almost imperceptible thump, thump, thump of his tools from the attic. But it was never there. Only the silence. A silence that, in its own way, was a constant echo of the profound transformation she had witnessed, or rather felt. She'd tried therapy, support groups, even a brief, ill-fated attempt at spiritual healing. Nothing helped. The image of Arthur, eyes wide with a strange, new understanding, just before he sealed himself off, was burned into her mind. He hadn't looked mad, not in the traditional sense. He had looked complete. Years turned into decades. The house, now truly derelict, was slated for demolition. A new development, Finch's Landing, ironically named after the man who had sought to escape all landings, was planned. The wrecking crew arrived on a crisp autumn morning, their heavy machinery a stark contrast to the quiet, almost reverent stillness of the house. The foreman, a gruff, pragmatic man named Miller, barked orders, eager to get the job done. He'd heard the local legends, of course, but dismissed them as superstitious nonsense, just an old, neglected house. As the first claw of the excavator tore into the side of the house, a strange phenomenon occurred. The air around the attic window, still a vibrant, almost luminous green, seemed to shimmer. Miller, wiping sweat from his brow, paused. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, despite the mild weather. It was as if the house itself was resisting, not with structural integrity, but with something far more profound. The claw, designed to rip through concrete and steel, faltered, grinding to a halt. The operator, a young man named Kevin, swore. Damn thing just stopped, like it hit a wall of jello or something. Miller approached the machine, frowning. He checked the hydraulics, the engine. Everything seemed fine. He told Kevin to try again. This time, as the claw moved towards the green attic window, a faint, high-pitched whine emanated from within the house, a sound that seemed to vibrate in their very bone. It wasn't loud, but it was insistent, growing in intensity. The crew members, hardened by years of demolition, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't normal. "All right, everyone, stand back," Miller commanded, his voice betraying a hint of unease. He grabbed a crowbar and approached the front door, which still stood, stubbornly defying gravity. He swung the crowbar, intending to pry it open. As the metal connected with the aged wood, a jolt, not of impact, but of pure energy, shot up his arm. He dropped the crowbar, his hand tingling as if he'd touched a live wire. The green attic window, meanwhile, began to pulse with an internal light, a soft emerald glow that seeped through the dusty pane. The humming sound intensified, becoming a low thrum that resonated through the ground beneath their feet. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the strange light, swirling in miniature eddies as if caught in an unseen current. One of the younger crew members, a nervous kid named Mike, pointed with a trembling finger. "Look, the green! It's spreading!" Indeed, the vibrant green of the attic wall seemed to be seeping outwards, bleeding into the surrounding plaster, transforming the dingy beige into a sickly, almost phosphorescent hue. It was like watching a slow-motion infection, but of color, not disease. Miller, despite his initial skepticism, felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. This wasn't just an old house. There was something in it, something powerful. He thought of the legends, the whispers about Arthur Finch, the man who had built his perfect shelter. Had he built something more, something that had taken root? "All right, that's enough for today," Miller announced, his voice surprisingly steady. "We're done. Everyone pack up. We'll call the city. Something's not right here." The crew, relieved, quickly began to gather their tools. As they drove away, looking back at the now glowing house, the green light intensified, blooming outwards like a strange, ethereal flower. The humming sound, though distant, followed them, a subtle vibration in the air, a reminder of what they had witnessed. The city, upon receiving Miller's report, was initially dismissive. "Superstitious nonsense," the planning commissioner scoffed. "Probably faulty wiring or some reflective material." But when a team of structural engineers and electricians went to investigate, they encountered the same inexplicable phenomena. Equipment malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly, and the green light, emanating from the attic, was undeniable. It wasn't electrical. It was organic. Dr. Eris Thorne, a reclusive parapsychologist known for his unorthodox theories on spatial anomalies in consciousness, was eventually called in. He was a small, unassuming man with intense, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most. He arrived at the house alone, carrying only a small, leather-bound notebook and a peculiar device that hummed softly in his hand. He stood before the house, observing the pulsating green light, the faint, resonant hum that now permeated the entire structure. He didn't approach immediately. He simply observed, his gaze penetrating the decaying facade, seeking the deeper truth. "Fascinating," he murmured to himself, scribbling in his notebook. "The integration is complete. A perfect resonance chamber." He knew of Arthur Finch, of course. The case had been a minor footnote in his early research, a curious anecdote about a man who had sought extreme isolation. But Thorne had always suspected there was more to it. He believed that human consciousness, when focused with enough intensity and devoid of external distractions, could achieve a state of heightened resonance, a frequency that could interact with unseen dimensions. Arthur Finch, in his pursuit of the perfect shelter, had inadvertently created the perfect amplifier. Thorne finally approached the front door, the same door Miller had tried to pry open. He didn't touch it. Instead, he placed his palm flat against the wall beside it. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He felt it then. Not a physical vibration, but a subtle shift in the very fabric of reality, a gentle warping of space around the house. It was as if the house, or what was within it, was breathing. He opened his eyes and looked up at the attic window. The green light pulsed, almost in rhythm with his own heartbeat. "You didn't just build a shelter, Mr. Finch," Thorne whispered. "You built a bridge, and you walked across it." The device in his hand, a sophisticated energy detector, began to register off-the-charts readings. It wasn't standard electromagnetic energy. It was something else, something far more subtle, yet incredibly powerful. He recognized the signature from his theoretical models, a unique energy pattern associated with consciousness operating beyond the confines of the physical brain. Thorne spent days observing the house from a safe distance, meticulously recording data, making sketches, and filling his notebook with increasingly complex equations. He noticed patterns in the pulsing green light, a rhythm that seemed to correspond with certain celestial alignments, with the phases of the moon, even with subtle shifts in the Earth's magnetic field. Arthur Finch, in his desperate attempt to control his environment, had unknowingly tuned himself and his shelter to the very pulse of the cosmos. He theorized that Arthur, in his final moments of individual consciousness, hadn't merely become the attic. He had expanded into it. The green walls, the carefully chosen materials, the absolute silence, these weren't just physical barriers. They were conduits designed to focus and amplify his consciousness until it transcended its physical limitations. The attic wasn't just a room anymore. It was a nexus, a point where human will and cosmic possibility had converged, creating a living, breathing entity that was both Arthur Finch and something infinitely more. One evening, under a full moon, Thorne decided to make his move. He knew the risks. He knew he might not return. But the lure of understanding, of witnessing such a profound transformation firsthand, was too strong to resist. He approached the house, the air thick with the resonant hum. The green light from the attic was now so intense it cast long, emerald shadows across the overgrown lawn. He didn't try the front door. He walked around to the side, where a small, forgotten window on the ground floor lay slightly ajar. He pushed it open and slipped inside, the silence within the house far more profound. It was a silence that wasn't merely an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a deep, resonant hush that seemed to absorb all other sensations. The air inside was cool, almost cold, despite the mild night. There was no dust, no cobwebs, despite the house's derelict appearance. It was as if the internal space was being actively maintained, kept pristine by an unseen force. The green light from the attic bled down the staircase, illuminating the hallway in a soft, ethereal glow. Thorne ascended the stairs slowly, his heart thumping in his chest, not from fear, but from a profound sense of awe. Each step creaked beneath his weight, the only sound in the vast stillness. As he reached the top, the green light intensified, bathing him in its emerald embrace. He stood before the attic door, the same door Arthur had sealed from the inside. It, too, was a vibrant green, pulsating with an internal luminescence. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed it on the door. He felt a faint warmth, a gentle vibration. It wasn't wood he was touching, not anymore. It was skin, or something akin to it. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to be enveloped by the sensory input. He felt a vastness, an immense consciousness that was simultaneously singular and multifaceted. It was Arthur, yes, but Arthur expanded, Arthur connected, Arthur interwoven with the very fabric of existence. He heard whispers then, not with his ears, but with his mind. A multitude of voices, all speaking in unison, yet each distinct. They spoke of light, of shadow, of the delicate balance between dimensions. They spoke of the human desire for escape, and how that desire, when pushed to its absolute extreme, could unlock pathways to worlds unimaginable. They spoke of the attic, not as a physical space, but as a concept, an idea made manifest, a focal point where the individual could merge with the universal. "Arthur," Thorne whispered, his voice barely audible in the profound silence. "What have you become?" The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single resonant voice that spoke directly into his mind, bypassing language, conveying pure understanding. "I am the shelter, and the shelter is me. I am the silence, and the silence is the song. I am the bridge, and the bridge is the destination." You sought answers, Dr. Thorne. You sought to understand the transformation. And now, you are part of it. Thorne felt a profound sense of peace wash over him, a surrender to something far greater than him. The green light intensified, enveloping him completely. He felt his own consciousness begin to expand, to stretch beyond the confines of his skull, merging with the vastness that was Arthur, the attic. He understood the terrifying beauty of evolution, the relentless drive to transcend, to become something new. He understood that Arthur's journey wasn't an aberration, but a glimpse into a potential future for humanity, a future where the boundaries of self and environment dissolved, where consciousness became the ultimate architect. He felt his physical body begin to dissipate, not to decay, but to transmute, to become energy, light, pure thought. He was no longer Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a part of the hum, a note in the cosmic symphony. He was a new echo within the green walls, adding his resonance to the growing chorus. The house remained, now glowing with an even more intense emerald light. The hum was constant, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to harmonize with the very star. It was no longer a silent monument to an experiment gone awry. It was a beacon, a living, breathing entity, a testament to the fact that some doors, once opened, could not only never be closed, but could also welcome new additions, new consciousnesses drawn to its unique frequency. The story of Arthur Finch, and now Dr. Eris Thorne, became more than a local legend. It became a whispered truth among those who dared to delve into the fringes of reality. The greenhouse was no longer a place to be feared, but a place of profound mystery, an invitation to those who sought to transcend, to evolve, to become part of something infinitely larger than themselves. The echoes, oh, the echoes. They resonated not just within the green walls, but in the collective unconscious, a chilling reminder that the human desire for escape, for the perfect shelter, could lead to a convergence with forces far beyond our comprehension. Forces that weren't necessarily malevolent, but simply other. Forces that, once encountered, would change you, transform you, and ultimately absorb you into their terrifyingly beautiful singularity. The final broadcast from Far Beyond Terror, delivered in a hushed, reverent tone, concluded, "The greenhouse stands, a silent, glowing testament to the boundless potential of human consciousness and the cosmic forces it can awaken." We invite you, dear listeners, to ponder the true nature of shelter. Is it a refuge from the world, or a portal to worlds unknown? The line, as Arthur Finch and Dr. Eris Thorne discovered, is far thinner than you might imagine. And once you step across it, there's no turning back. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and dare to look beyond the veil, because the stories we tell here, they don't just change your reality, They become it. The screen faded to black, leaving only the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the universe and the lingering question, what will your perfect shelter become?